Practical Farmers of Iowa staff member. I'm very glad to have you all join us today. I had a quick introduction here in just a couple minutes, and we'll get started. We're all here today because we all care about farmers earning a good living, taking care of the land, and continuing their livelihood year after year, generation after generation, which makes Iowa such a wonderful place to live, with small towns that are vibrant all across the state, producing great incomes for families and a host of other things. Here's a photo from one of our farmers over in western Iowa, and at the Roseman family farm. We also have great diversity of farmers in our network of crop and livestock farmers, folks all over the place in different enterprises and markets. This is Vic and Cindy Madsen's farm, also in western Iowa, longtime members of Practical Farmers of Iowa. And we get a great opportunity to help connect farmers who want to know more about conservation practices, so they can make a good living, but also take care of the land for the future. And here's an example of one of those practices: cover crops that are used in Iowa and with more frequency. And we think that really the key part of all this is people getting together. So that's why we provide over 100 events a year where farmers can talk to other farmers in their community and really, sit across the table and go out into the field and have a good talk about different practices and things, and find out what makes things work and how to make things work better for their farms and in their lives. So we have this great kind of purpose, and we all care about the next generation. That's what it's really all about. We want to do a good job for today and for tomorrow, so the next folks that are coming after us have something great to work with and continue the good work that we've done throughout our lives. And how do Farminars fit into this? Well, Farminars are a great way to get together in the off season and learn from farmers without having to drive somewhere, and learn from folks just from your comfort of your own computer. And we've had a really fun spring Farminar series this year. We added in 3 extra ones as a result of the cold spring, kind of the late spring to come to Iowa. And we were able to squeeze in a few more opportunities to learn and network with farmers. This concludes our 2013 Spring Farminar series tonight. But do feel free to check out the past Farminars in our Farminar archive at practicalfarmers.org/Farminar. The process for how this works is we're going to do some introductions we're going to have my brief introduction, which is hopefully ending very soon, and then we're going to have the farmers get to speak for 20 to 30 minutes each and share their process and experiences with hiring farm laborers. And they're going to ask the questions that they have to improve their system and to maybe make some modifications if necessary from different labor experts. And we will also take your questions for the full half hour. At the end, we'll have questions from the audience as well. So please feel free to ask your own questions from the experts and the farmers. We will conclude promptly at 8:30. So I'll hold everybody to that. I'm the timekeeper. And we'll definitely thank you all for participating throughout the next hour and a half. The final slide I had is just a photo. It was a quick encouragement for folks to join Practical Farmers of Iowa if you're not a member. It's a great organization to be a member of in Iowa and around the states. We've got 10% of our members are from outside of Iowa. So if you're not from Iowa, you can still be a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa and find great value in that membership. Still not convinced, but want to learn a little more? Check us out on Facebook. Facebook.com/practicalfarmers is our fan page there. And if I can get the slides going in the right direction, we've got a cover crop field day coming up, April 4th, the 2013 Spring Cover Crop Field Day in Elkader, Iowa. We've had cover crop field days from around the state. Sarah Carlson, as well as farmers who use cover crops, are at these events. And if you want to network with those folks and kind of take some more time to think about adding cover crops to your rotation or to your system of farming, it'd be a great opportunity. And those are all free, and you can click on that link to check out more information, free to attend, and you can have a good lunch and everything with other farmers and landowners interested in cover crops. That is, the one other thing I wanted to say is please put your email in the chat box and where you're from. It's kind of fun to see where folks are coming from. And make sure to click the viewer count. This kind of helps us report the number of folks that are using this Farminar technology. And it's in the upper right-hand corner. You can see when you click your vote, it changes automatically. So feel free to do that at this time. We're going to start with Ben Saunders, if that's all right with you, Ben. So if you want to turn on your microphone, I'll pull up your slideshow, and you can begin.
All right, great. Thanks, Luke. Can everybody hear me okay? that I really appreciate all these Farminar's Practical Farmers Iowa does, that I've learned quite a bit, and I think this one should be a really great one to learn how to hire employees and how to make it by the books. Well, to give you a brief background on my farm, that we're certified organic by the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. I was the farm manager for Turtle Farm there in Granger, Iowa for about 3 years, and I worked for them for the last 8 years. And then in 2012, Angela Tedesco decided that she was ready to retire from active farming. And one way that we came up with was for me to be able to rent the land from her to kind of continue on the CSA model with my own farming enterprise, which I feel real fortunate about, that being a beginning farmer, it's really hard to be able to afford land right now. And so we worked really hard to try and come up with a great rental arrangement, and we found one that I think was very, very fair to both of us. And so I'm fortunate to be able to continue on with the CSA program. With that continuation, though, that I've changed the name, so that way hopefully someday I'm able to purchase my own land and take the farm name with me. So it is now called Wabi Sabi Farm. But I plan to continue a lot of the same things that we did as Turtle Farm. Our main market is a 180-member community-supported agriculture program. For those of you that aren't familiar with community-supported agriculture, what that means is that I have 180 families or unique members that pay a fee at the beginning of the season. And for my farm, it's for a 20-week season that whatever's in season at the time, I deliver to them in a weekly share. I'm hoping to have a pretty good year this year growing. That so far this moisture, although it's kept me out of the fields quite a bit, is most welcome. So I hope to also have occasional sales through the Iowa Food Cooperative and through an on-farm stand that I hold on Saturday mornings. Another thing I'm trying to do also is that my CSA members each have an allotment of strawberries, raspberries, and asparagus that they get. So I'm hoping we'll have some good years with these perennial crops now, and be able to open up to U-Pick also. That just trying to find ways to encourage people to come out to the farm and to see how food's grown, I think is very important. The farm is minimally mechanized, and most of the day-to-day activities are done by hand. By minimally, if I can say it, mechanized, I do have a tractor, a 39 horsepower tractor, but I try and use it on rare occasions just for basic field preparation, and also occasional weeding. But one of the things with a community-supported agriculture program, as well as many other fruit and vegetable farmers, is that we grow a diverse amount of crops, and that means different spacings, and so that makes it very difficult to kind of do a lot of tractor cultivation. So a lot of the work is done by hand, which is why I'm really interested in this Farminar tonight, because I hire labor quite a bit at the farm and in a whole lot of different ways that I will talk about here. These are the types of labor I use on the farm right now. I'm growing on about 7 to 8 acres in any one season. So in order to help me accomplish this, I hire 3 seasonal full-time farm crew members. Then I have 6 to 8 work for share members. Now in this work for share arrangement, these are members of the CSA that come out and work 3.5 hours a week at the farm on designated days that help me kind of accomplish some of the labor that I do at the farm. Mainly involves rinsing produce, packaging produce as well, kind of weighing out sugar snap peas or bush beans, that type of thing. It also involves them kind of distributing okra out into quart containers or other things that I need help with in that manner. I also, just as of last season, I started hiring some contract labor. That I've done work with Lutheran Services of Iowa and the Refugee Garden Training Program, and have discovered that these people are amazing workers. There's a lot of refugees that have come from Bhutan, Nepal, Senegal, Sudan, and so this has been a really great arrangement, I think, right now, that these people, you know, their English isn't the best. Some of them don't speak English at all, but they come from agricultural backgrounds. So a lot of the time what I like to say is that when I have a group of them come out to work, I kind of show them how I want to do something. They show me a better way to do it most of the time, and I say, okay, well, I'll see you guys at lunchtime. Then I also rely on volunteers at the farm. Now, this may not be the best to always rely on volunteers, but I have a great core group of people that are both CSA members and just folks in the general public that want to come out and help, and I try and arrange a schedule with them every week. Of course, it's really kind of iffy whether people are going to be able to show up that week or not if they're volunteers, but I do rely on volunteers also quite a bit to help me accomplish my labor at the farm. This is a picture of my full-time seasonal farm crew that I had last season that I'm very fortunate. They're all returning this season to work. For a long time, with Turtle Farm, we sourced our labor through Iowa State University, college students that wanted to come out and work for the summer to get that experience working on a farm. There were pros and cons to it. A lot of the time, being college students, it was their summer break that they were working, and I don't blame them one bit. They wanted to take some time off during the summer, and it made it really hard to be able to get a lot of things accomplished when folks are wanting to take off for a week during the summer. And I really was trying to work with them quite a bit to be able to allow them to get that time away from the farm and go have some fun during the summer. I remember what it was like being a college student, and that summer break was very, very important. But so right now, the person on the far left, Angelique, she was a refugee that I ended up hiring that came from, oh no, now I don't remember. She came from Sudan. That she speaks English very well, and has just been a great asset to have at the farm. That she really came from that agricultural background, really has a great desire to work. One of the funniest things is that lamb's quarters, I found out, is called lenga lenga in the culture she came from. So she was always scolding me every time I would pull a lamb's quarters out of the ground or something like that. So most of the time, she would also like to take that and plant that in her home garden, which was great. That she brought a couple dishes made out of it to the farm the next day after she took some home, and it was really good. The guy in the middle is named Zach. That he worked a lot with the refugee gardening program and also has a big interest in starting his own farm someday. So that's been a really great asset to have, both because he is invested in the farm and wants to see it succeed, and also he's taking this opportunity to learn a lot, where I hope he's able to take that on to his next farming adventure. Then the person on the right, Amanda, she is another person like Zach, that this spring she's graduating from Iowa State University with a degree in horticulture and really would like to start her own farm someday. So these folks have been a great asset, and I really couldn't do it without them. A lot of they help me with all the day-to-day types of operations that go on at the farm, anything from planting to weeding, planting cash crops. They also help me plant the cover crops throughout the season. They really help me also kind of monitor what goes on with some of the seasonal farm or the contract labor that I have at the farm. They also help with cleaning the produce. They help me with bagging the produce at times, and they also help me kind of monitor the work for share people. So that way I'm able to be out in the fields doing some different work and know things are going to get done in the way we'd like to have them done. Next slide. Here's one of our work for share members. A lot of the time, being a CSA program, I'd like these work for share members to have a great farming experience. So most of the time I try and have them work together there in the farm stand. In this picture, they're cleaning Cortland storage onions. So I think that this is something important too, as a way to offer to people to get that little farm experience and to come out. But this is something that also has to be an opportunity that's beneficial for the farmer as well. That I have a task I'd like for them to do for the day, and that's something that they're able to get done. In this picture, the two people in the back, Amanda, full-time farm crew in the green shirt, and Angelique in the yellow shirt. There, Amanda has the hat on and green shirt. They were kind of there to help supervise too, which really helps me out quite a bit. And here was a picture of contract labor. These women were from Burma, and they came out for the day and helped me weed these Brussels sprouts. With the contract labor, the way that I use them right now is currently just to kind of help me accomplish some of those tasks that I just keep putting off, to be honest with you, because I just have so many other things to get done, and it seems like such a daunting task. These women came out for 4 hours one time and just weeded all these Brussels sprout plants right there. So that was a really great help to me, that I hope to use the refugees a lot more in the future. That this seems to be just a really beneficial relationship for both of us. And I know this isn't an option that most people would have, is this great pool of labor, but I'm sure there's other ways to explore kind of in your area what there is around there. What else can I say? And it was really fun for me also, as a selfish type of thing, that they would often invite me to eat lunch with them too, and the foods that they cooked were amazing. So that was a really great opportunity. None of my contract labor, I should go back and say that all my full-time farm crew labor, at least the lowest person right now is making $8.50 an hour, and everybody else is making at least that or more. With the work for share members, most of them receive either a full share or a half share, where a full share is valued at $545 for the 20-week season, and a half share is valued at $285 for a 10-week season. Now, these folks from Burma, I've hired them on at $8 an hour, and the way it worked last season was, no individual that came out to work for me would make more than $550 for the growing season for that year. Volunteers. I know it's really hard to rely on volunteers, but it's something that I've found has really helped me quite a bit, and I've been very fortunate to have a really die-hard group of volunteers that come out to work quite a bit. This right here is Andy on the back of our Rotary One transplanter that I've discovered it plants potatoes very well. So we planted potatoes with that, and Andy just wanted to come out and help and really enjoyed the time out at the farm. And so I found that the volunteers, as long as you can find a job that's enjoyable for them too, where they're having a good experience out at the farm, they're more willing to come back. And I know it can be a very unreliable source of labor, but it's one that fortunately so far, knock on wood, I've found to be really helpful for me to accomplish kind of the day-to-day activities that go on at the farm. I guess that's a brief introduction about me and what I do at Wabi Sabi Farm. I think, Luke, you were wanting to save the questions towards the end so we can maybe switch over to Gene.
Sounds good.
Hi, Mike.
I heard you fine, Gene. You can go ahead whenever it's loaded up.
I can go ahead. Welcome, everyone. This is a few captions of the farm. This is our family. We have 4 sons and a daughter. Our daughter's in Omaha with her 4 kids. And our 4 sons work right here on the farm. We have a herd of about 150, 175 milking Holsteins. And we have 450 acres. And we farm just south of Hudson, Iowa. The farm, we sold to AMPI our milk, and in 2000 we decided that we were going to, the boys started coming home, and we decided to put a processing plant on the farm and start marketing our own milk. The processing plant is on the farm, and we have a delivery truck, and we started out making home deliveries in the farmer's market, and then we switched and we're going to put up 2 retail stores in Waterloo and Cedar Falls.
We also have a retail store on our farm site.
That's my husband, Jay. The boys have their own areas that they work in. Our youngest son, Blake, is involved with the cows, and he does all the breeding, calving, milking, and feeding the calves and the paperwork. His wife, Jordan, is our graphic gal, our bookkeeper, and helps with the tours. Blair, the next one up, is in charge of the nutrition, crops, and the field work, as well as the farm maintenance repairs. Brad is in charge of the processing, so he runs the creamery, so he has his own labor. Then we have Brent, who's in charge of public relations, as well as all the delivering of the product. In the processing plant, we process our milk into whole, skim, 1% chocolate, We have a mild cheddar cheese curd. And then we have butter and ice cream. We also do a soft serve. And then we started out delivering it in the farmers market, and then we realized that we needed to have a retail outlet. Thus, we opened the store in Waterloo called the Muru, and that's at the corner of Kimball and Ridgeway. These are a few of our Holstein cows. We do have a few red and white ones in there, so if you see some different colored ones, we do have some. We have 3 silos on the farm. We raise alfalfa, corn, and put some sorghum in as well. Blair's feeding with a John Deere tractor and feeding our dry cows at that point. And then we also have, let's see, this is our creamery. The creamery is where Brad hangs out. We put our milk in gallon jugs, and then we have heavy cream in quarts and also gallon jugs. We process about 8,000 gallons of milk a week with fluid milk, ice cream, butter, cheese curds, and cream. The labor in the processing, we have about 4. I think there's 4 or 5 people that help work in the processing plant. This is our new tourist center. Tourism is becoming a big thing. People on the community and in the area and the state and other states come in for farm tours to learn where their food's coming from. We feel this is a very important part of our farming operation, is to share the story of agriculture and where the milk is coming from and how it gets from the cow to your kitchen tables. Jordan and I do most of the tours. We have a few other people that can pitch in. The boys, my husband, pitch in and help with the tours as well with large groups. We have one other person that will help with the feeding of the cows and plenty of the other labor.
Each of the boys in charge of their separate areas hires their own help. The 2 stores, we have managers that pretty well take care of those facilities and that part of the business, and they hire their crews there.
Yeah.
The total labor force is from the cropping to the cows to the processing to the retail amounts to about 45 people. That includes all family labor and full-time and part-time labor.
Most of the retail people at the store, besides our managers, are receiving they start out at $7.50 an hour. I'm going to jump back to the slides. These are our wallabies and our kangaroos. We started out with the wallabies as our mascot logo, and we just recently picked up a couple of baby kangaroos. So that we didn't know what to do with the pouch, so our logo has the calf in the pouch of the wallaby. Now we're going to, let's talk a little bit about, here's the retail stores. The one on the left is our Muru store in Waterloo, and the one on the right is the outlet in Cedar Falls. We have a full dip cabinet with several flavors of our ice creams. We've got about 25 or 30 flavors. And then the soft serve is in the outlet. We didn't have room to put both of them in both stores. We have, Eric likes to hire college-age students. He prefers not to hire the high school students. High school students are great workers, but they are involved in so many activities that their time to be able to work is very, very difficult, and lots of them want their weekends off. So it makes it difficult to work with the high school kids. We've had pretty good luck with some of the high school kids are very good to work with. Other ones have other ideas. The stores are open 8 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. And then in the summer, we open up at 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 at Muru. And Sundays we're open from 11 or 12, depending on where you're at, till 9 o'clock at night. So we're open 7 days a week for people to get product. Our store on the farm is open from 7 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. family labor at the farm, we start that at $8 an hour. And that increases as they show more experience. And then we'll increase them. Jordan, do you have some comments on that?
Are there any more slides? Talk to Luke.
Luke, do we have more slides?
That's the last slide.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else you guys want to? Brent, do you have any input? Brent's our delivery man. Okay, he's sitting good right now. I guess that pretty much sums up what we're doing on this end.
Excellent. I'll step in here and ask the experts what kind of questions they have first of the farmers to be able to know more about their situation with legal compliance and different labor regulations to look out for. While I pull up the questions from Ben's slideshow, if you have any questions, labor experts, I forgot to introduce the labor experts. Maybe you can introduce yourselves briefly at this time.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Okay. Well, this is Mike Staebell. I'm with the United States Department of Labor. And I can't really think of any questions. I think both of you guys explained yourself very well, except in Gene's case, I see the difference. You have really two different types of employment from the standpoint of the federal labor law. Is everyone hearing me okay? Luke, am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. And so what you got with the Hansons, of course, is you got the true agriculture, the farm, and then you got the retail. And I guess I won't get into it all right now, but the thing to keep in mind in light of federal labor law is, agriculture is treated very differently from non-ag. So it goes to that first question. I'm going to jump the gun a little bit, if you don't mind, but do farm workers need to be paid overtime? And that's the biggest difference. The answer is no. Under federal law, now Iowa has no overtime law, so I'm speaking for my counterparts here sitting right next to me. But so you're only worried about the federal overtime law, and a farm, when you're working on a farm for a farmer, and that's a very concise, short version, but that's basically what it is. The overtime laws do not apply. There's actually a federal exemption from overtime. But even though the retail store is serving that farmer, in this case, it's still a retail operation, it's not a farm. So in the store, if anybody had overtime, they'd have to get the time and a half over 40. So that's the only comment, really, that I would have at this point.
This is Karen Pfab. I'm with Iowa Workforce Development. I'm with our labor division. And one of the items mentioned was the children possibly working in the retail store. Iowa does have child labor laws. And with 14 and 15-year-olds, there are some restrictions regarding hours and duties that they can perform. And so if you're hiring children in Iowa or any other state, make sure you check with your state agency to get those requirements. The other thing in Iowa for 14 and 15-year-olds, we do require that they get work permits. That would be for the children working in the store. 16 and 17-year-olds in Iowa do not have hour restrictions. And sound like with an ice cream store, didn't sound like there would be too many duty restrictions there that I could think of that would prohibit a 16 or 17-year-old working other than their other school activities.
We have
Okay, my name is Dave Eklund. My expertise falls in unemployment insurance, and so far, nothing I heard in the presentations, the excellent presentations from Ben and Gene, caused me any concern or any comments that I need to make at this time. I guess I'll just wait for a question specific to my, my expertise. Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like us to run through the questions that Ben has up on the screen, Luke?
Gene, did you have a question? I heard something. I wasn't sure if you had a question in response. Or Ben, do you have a response question from what was said initially by the experts?
We have a question. At one time when we were hiring, I hired a couple of younger people at the stores, and they had their work permits, and one of the restrictions was they could not go into the freezers.
It's federal. Did you have that too? Yeah.
For state of Iowa, the kids can go in the freezer to retrieve something. They can't be in the freezer for an extended period of time, like stocking it, sorting things, moving things around, but they can walk in, retrieve something, and walk back out. They can't just be in there. And that's for the state of Iowa.
This is the first time we've heard this angle. How are we people out here supposed to be educated on what's going on? You know, one government person will say one thing, and another government person is going to say something else.
I know, well, what we've tried to do is do more outreach, do more education. So if someone contacts our agency, we set up a presentation for, members of that group or that organization and try to provide that, that outreach and that education to them. We're also available by phone to provide any information that the party would need.
And this is Mike for the federal side. To answer that question, I just build on what Karen said.
We
Go
were
ahead.
audited by the Federal Labor Department, and it was clear and cut and dry that we couldn't have under 16-year-olds in a freezer.
Well, the federal rules say that basically mirror what Karen said, or the state. If they want to go in and fetch something out, they can do that. But I have to tell you something from the federal perspective. We usually caution employers not to even let 14, 15-year-olds go into the freezer. Because, let me just tell you, I've been doing this job for 31 years, and I was an investigator before I became a manager, and now I manage the Des Moines office. But one thing leads to another. So if they told you to keep the 14, 15-year-olds out of the freezer, I can assure you that, they're looking out for you. And even though you could send them in, then that leads to something else. And I can't tell you how many times in my career I've run into that situation where it started out in a minimal way, but then when the Department of Labor showed up and we interviewed the employees and the miners and everything, say, oh yeah, I'd go in there and spend a half an hour, rearranging the product or sweeping the floor or stocking. And so, I can't speak to what they may have said to you, but the point is, the rule says that kids could run in there, grab something, and come out. But if I had a business right now, after what I know after 31 years, I wouldn't even let them in there, because the fines can add up.
We don't like to hire the younger ones anyway. We learned that it works out better for us to hire even the college-age kids.
Well, that's what you pointed out, which is good, because Karen didn't mention, but the state and federal are very similar too, in the fact that it's not just the duties that are limited by a 14, 15-year-old, but it's the hours they can work. And they can't work past 7 in the evening when school is in session. They can't work past 9 in the evening in the summer, or ever before 7 in the morning. And there's all kinds of other, I won't bore you with them right now, but the result of some of these rules, quite frankly, is just what you said. Employers shy away from hiring the younger kids just because the rules are very restrictive. The idea being, of course, to protect the minors from any kind of a problem or issue or danger. But let me just say one other thing. The state has a good website, and I've been on it, but the U.S. Department of Labor, it's dol.gov. I would encourage everyone who hires anyone to go on dol.gov. And our agency's Wage and Hour. And you can click on Wage and Hour, and you have every piece. It's almost too much information, to be honest with you. And you can look up child labor, you can look up minimum wage, you can look up overtime, agriculture, all of it. So my suggestion is that you check out the website. And before we sign off today, too, again, I'm not speaking for Karen, but I'll give you our phone number at our office in Des Moines that you can call. And any kind of issue, question you're not sure about, you call us and we'll gladly help you out. And we can send you booklets and publications that will give you all the information you possibly need.
Thank you.
You bet.
I wondered if I could jump in here, and one, I wanted to save time for Ben to respond if he had any questions so far for the experts based on what they've already talked about. But I also wondered if Jean and Ben, would you be comfortable sharing your form procedure, like what you do when you hire farm labor?
I'm going to turn that over to Jordan.
We have a very informal hiring process at the farm. This is Jordan. I do the bookkeeping for the farm. So we a lot of times we'll just get people calling us that are looking for work. We don't actively seek employees very much. Sometimes we'll actually put help wanted signs at our retail stores and we get people interested in working on the farm from that also. And we do have one of our employee applications on our website, so people can just fill that out and send that in too. But so as far as the farm work, you know, we have them come out, give them a tour, interview them, and just kind of see how it goes with how much time they want to put into it and when they're willing to work. We, of course, milk twice a day. That's what we need the most labor for, 4 in the morning and 4 in the evening. So we've right now we have a pretty good crop of employees, but there's definitely been times in the past where their restrictions or willingness to work has been a problem for us. So, but you know, that comes at a very early time in the morning, so that first milking. So, and of course, we do have for our ag workers, not only do we have the milkers, but we have people that work in the creamery, and both would probably have a certain amount of, you know, risk with heavy lifting. Of course, with those that work with the cows, you know, danger of the cows injuring them or what have you. But we are mostly hiring college-age students for those type jobs too, and then they tend to have a little bit more time also. We have we only have right now one person other than family that would be considered full-time. But again, it's kind of hard to, on the farm, it's kind of hard to distinguish that because, like you say, with the overtime, you know, a person can work 40, 45 hours a week. They don't have to get paid overtime. And so I guess what I'm saying is the definition of full-time is a little bit, you know, skewed for ag workers.
This is Ben. I also have a really kind of informal hiring process that most of the time if somebody expresses interest to me that they want to come out and work at the farm, I try and have them come out for like maybe 2 or 3 hours on a day just so I can get to meet them, and I have them do a task with me, and I try and send them home with some vegetables that day, you know, just to kind of say thank you for coming out to volunteer. Then after I've gotten a chance to know the folks that want to come out and work, I'll usually end up deciding then if I want to send them an application or not. And again, this is a really kind of informal thing, my application process, that you know, you can ask people as many questions as you want, but you really don't know how good they work till they come out. So after I've decided that I want to offer some people a job, that I'll have them come out and fill out the application, and then I'll kind of at that point offer them a job. Luke, did you want me to kind of go through some of these questions now?
Yeah, that sounds great.
That I have up here? Okay. It sounds like the seasonal farm workers needing to pay overtime question was covered. But I was wondering if there's a definition of what a seasonal farm worker is as far as the duties they perform. That I've been concerned that sometimes I'll have, you know, my farm workers, they'll be out in the field actually working, but then they'll come in and they'll help me pack a CSA share or something like that as well. So I was wondering if that is still considered the seasonal farm worker and falls under that category of not needing them to be paid overtime. If I have ever done a farmer's market or something, I don't have these same employees doing the farmer's market with me or anything like that. But I was wondering if there's a definition of kind of what is the duties of a seasonal farmer.
Okay, well, this is Mike. We agreed I'll take this one to start anyway. And keep in mind, you know, I speak to federal law, and in many of these arenas, the federal and state laws mirror each other in labor law. But between Karen and I, we'll let you know if there's a variance. But you know, I really would break this question down into 2 parts. You know, what's a farm worker? What's an agriculture worker? And then we get into the seasonal part. So an agriculture worker is someone performing work on a farm for a farmer. And understand I'm oversimplifying here, but if you gave me 8 hours, we could get into it a little deeper. But for now, so the persons that a farmer employs to do their work out on the farm, that's an agriculture or farm worker. So, Ben, your comment about somebody packing, stuff for one of your share people and stuff, that's still part and parcel of your farm, and your produce. So that would still be a farm worker from the standpoint of the labor laws. Okay. Now, the key to that part is, though, and I don't think we have to worry about that tonight, but is that these people that do things like packing, shipping, transporting, things like that, as long as they're handling the goods that were grown by the farmer who employs them, okay, they're also farm workers. So I may drive a truck. I may work in a packing shed all day. And I realize we're talking about a different environment here, but you realize we get involved in things down south with things like tomatoes and okra and all those things where they have hundreds of workers. Once farmers combine and workers handling goods from more than one farmer, including the farmer that does not employ them, then they are no longer a farm worker for the purposes of federal labor law, and they have to get overtime. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind. So seasonal is just what it says. Then seasonal farm workers are people who are only employed for a particular season. And typically, of course, this is in a crop type environment. Now maybe they're brought in to harvest hand harvested crops. They're only there for a few weeks and then they're gone. There might be another crew that a farmer brings in to weed, and do things like that. And all those folks are seasonal because the idea is they're temporary. Now, this is a perfect evening because we've got both sides of the agricultural equation. We've got the seasonal folks like on Ben's operation, and then we got the year-round folks like on the Hansons. So their employees would still be farm workers, agriculture workers, those who work out on the farm and the milking shed and all that and the creamery, but they're not seasonal because they're essentially working full-time, That's really the difference. But from the standpoint of whether or not an employer has to pay overtime, what you really want to know is, are they an agriculture or are they a farm worker? And in the examples we've been talking about this evening, everyone is, with the exception of the people who work in those retail stores on the dairy side. Okay?
Do you have a comment on that?
Sure, go ahead.
I was, through my labor audit, I was led to believe that if we sold only our own produce in our retail stores, we could still qualify as agricultural. But being that we sell products from other sources and other vendors, now, as you have said, we qualify for the overtime stuff.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. It's such a fine line sometimes, and these laws aren't always black and white. But I would agree with you that if all they're doing is handling and selling the goods that were raised on their employer's farm, then they would be considered farm workers for that purpose. And just as an example, so you guys can kind of get a feel for what we're talking about here, keep in mind this law was written in 1938, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. So when they talked about farms in 1938, they're a lot different than farms today. So if you go up to north central Iowa and you see some of the egg operations up there where they have 1 million hens, on one property, oh heck, they got 5 million hens. Trust me, I've been there. And they go to these egg processing plants where they have 100, 200, 300 employees and they're handling these eggs, breaking them, etc. Those people are all agricultural workers and they don't have to get overtime. Congress had no idea back in 1938 that this is where farming would go, but the laws have never been changed. And I just want to point this out for you guys on the call that are employers. We get calls every single day in our office with people with complaints about how they're paid, and we get a zillion calls from people who work for big hog confinements, big chicken operations, and they want to complain about not getting overtime. Well, all we ask them is, are all the animals where you work and that you handle and deal with, are they all owned by the farmer who employs you? And the answer is yes. Then they're not entitled to overtime. So there's a lot of implications here. But that is a good point about at some point the retail thing gets kind of gray, because the idea behind the retail was the farm stands, the farmers markets, the roadside stands and all that. I don't think the law is caught up with the idea that farmers such as the Hansons, have their own retail operation. But for now, if that's all they do is handle the goods that were raised by their farmer, produced by their farmer, they don't have to get overtime. So how long ago did you guys have that review by the Department of Labor, may I ask? I'm just curious.
Approximately 2.5 years ago.
Okay. It was probably one of my staff that actually that conducted that. So, Okay, just curious.
No problem.
Any other questions then about the seasonal farm worker or who's a farm worker?
No, I think you did a really good job covering that. That it's just kind of my understanding is as long as they are handling everything that I grow and produce on the farm, whether it's on my on-farm stand or packing shares, that they're considered a farm worker.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And Luke put up a really great link right there to the resources and employment frequently asked questions. But I'm wondering kind of basically what sorts of documentation does a farmer need to have each type of paid labor fill out?
The IRS has requirements in this area, and by the way, this is Karen with Iowa Workforce. But I've dealt with, for 20 years, the unemployment insurance side, so I have some experience with the tax side as well. And the IRS does require an employer to fill out I-9s and W-4s for their workers. The W-4 is your withholdings for state, your federal withholdings, and then your I-9 is the federal verification of employment, where they're asking you to look at their driver's license, their social security card, a passport, some sort of verification of this origin of this person, you know, like a birth date. You know, they're looking for certain items on that.
Mm-hmm.
So the I-9 is definitely one thing, you know, that federal government's requiring you to have for your workers.
That has to be mailed.
Right. And I'm going to add, Mike here is going to add something else. If you're hiring local folks to come and work for you, obviously I second what Karen says. Our staff will look at the I-9s when we come and visit. That's part of what we do. And then if you're subject to our rules, of course, then you have to have records of the hours that the people worked, how much you paid them. In other words, your payroll records. And you have to have those, and you have to save those for 2 years. Your payroll journals or registers you have to preserve for 3 years under federal labor law, and your time cards, time records, whatever you keep, those have to be kept for 2. But you are required to have time records and payroll records. Now I want to back up a little bit because this is part of it. Some farmers, I mean, we know they don't have to pay overtime, but the very smallest farms don't have to pay minimum wage even. And this is untrue, right, Karen, under Iowa law too. And I would be remiss not to mention this to you guys, because Ben, basically, I got to be honest with you, based on your presentation, I doubt that you're probably subject to federal or state, right, Karen?
That's right.
Because there's a thing called a 500 man-day test, and that's in the state law and the federal law. And what that says is only farms who employ the equivalent of 500 man-days of labor in a quarter, calendar quarter, are subject to the minimum wage, okay? And for that matter, subject to the federal labor laws at all. So if you're scratching your head about what the heck is 500 man-days, what 500 man-days is in a calendar quarter is basically the equivalent of about 5.5 full-time workers, or 5 full-time and 1 part-time. So if you have more than, let's just say if you have 6 full-time workers for a quarter, for 3 months out of a year, then you're going to have to pay federal minimum wage. And if you don't, you won't have to pay federal minimum wage. So that's another issue here. But as far as documentation, then I got to add one other thing. If anybody on the call hires migrants, okay, now we're talking about a whole nother law, a federal law called the Migrant and Seasonal Worker Protection Act. We call it MISPA for short. And that's if you contract, you know, I saw the contract labor thing and I realized that was a little different scenario. But if you contract with somebody to bring up a crew to harvest or weed or do whatever, it's big, of course, in Iowa in the seed corn for the detasseling, okay, there's all kinds of documentation that you need to get from the person that you're contracting with. They have to be registered with the U.S. Department of Labor as a farm labor contractor. And if they're not, they can be fined, but so can you. So my only piece of advice is if you're hiring migrant workers, which is defined as people who don't go home to their own place to sleep at night. So they don't have to be from Mexico or Texas. They can be from Illinois. They can be from Davenport if you're in Des Moines, okay? But the people that you arrange that with have to be registered with the U.S. Department of Labor. And as a grower, we call it an agricultural employer, it would be incumbent upon you to ask that person that brings you that crew, hey, let me see your farm labor contractor card from the U.S. Department of Labor. And if they don't have it, I wouldn't be using them because you can be fined for that. So that's another piece of documentation. I'm suspecting on this call most of us are, dealing with local people. So I think as long as you have your payroll records and as long as you have the records Karen mentioned, you're going to be fine. Okay?
I have a question regarding the I-9.
Okay.
We have them fill that out, and because do we have to send that in? And what is the purpose of it other than recognizing the fact and verifying who they are? Is that the main purpose for that form?
You do not have to mail the form in or send it in to
Okay.
anyone. Part of what the reasoning behind it is so that you're verifying through whatever documents that they're presenting that this person is indeed who they are and that you're getting a legitimate Social Security number and identity for this person.
Okay.
And that they're here legally. And that's
Right.
the big thing. To verify that they're here legally, and that it's not an undocumented worker, whatever term.
Okay, that answers our question on that.
Pardon me?
That answers the question on that one.
Okay.
Thank you.
And let me add one other thing to what Karen said. You don't have to send them in, but you may be asked to produce them by any number of agencies, okay? Because the U.S. Department of Labor, my agency, Wage and Hour, will ask, but it's conceivable that immigration, or ICE, as we call them, could show up. And I have it on good authority that ICE is out there doing I-9 audits. Now, I'm not so sure employers of your size, but I have talked to probably 10 employers this year already in April that have been subjected to ICE audits, and believe me, those are no fun. And they're not here so we can trash them, right, you guys? But ICE, they take this very seriously, and they're going to really check. Now, let me add one last thing, because I don't know if that's on this one, but everybody always asks, as an employer, how am I supposed to know if the document that that employee shows me is legit? No one expects you to, okay? But if you get a piece of tattered paper with a photocopy and it looks like there's some whiteout on it and the picture isn't quite right, yeah, in that case, then I'd be very questionable. But if it looks good, you're not expected to be an expert on things like Iowa driver's licenses or green cards or any federal or state document. If it looks okay, if it's not super suspicious, you're okay. But if it's really, really out there, then you probably would have a responsibility to either say, bring me something else, or I really can't hire you. One of the two.
Well, we kind of sly away from that end of it. We have plenty of people looking for work that are friends and neighbors that work out real well.
And that's the best. That's the best.
Does one of you want to take a second to explain the state monitor advocate role? We were hoping to have Marco Adami on tonight, but we had some technical difficulties on his end.
Must have been in the air tonight, huh, Luke? Well, my agency, we work with Marco quite a bit, so I'll presume to speak very vaguely for Marco. But Marco is a relatively new position in Iowa, but this state monitor advocate was put in place to deal with issues of migrant workers in Iowa, okay? And of course, the intention is legal migrant workers. I'm sure they help everyone, and of course, most of the migrants, not most, but a good share of them are farm workers in Iowa. So the monitor advocate, he has staff scattered throughout the state, in east, west, north, and south, and then they exist to assist or deal with issues that arise out of the employment and just the issues that migrants can possibly come up with. And they're part of Iowa Workforce Development. And they grew out of another, I can't remember what it used to be called. Anyway, the point is that these centers are out there, and some people are aware of them, others are not. But if a migrant farm worker has a problem, like they got stiffed on their paycheck, they worked for 3 weeks detasseling corn, and then their contractor skipped out on them without paying them, they can go to the monitor advocate, and the monitor advocate will help get them paid, that type of thing. They really deal with a myriad of issues, and I can't even tell you all that they are, but they're set, almost every state, I'm not sure if it's a federal requirement, but almost every state has a monitor advocate who exists for that purpose, okay? And they'll steer these people to agencies that can help them with issues they may have. Taxes, whatever the situation may be. And in a nutshell, that's what the monitor advocate does. Okay, Luke, that's all I know. That's all I can tell you right now. Yep.
Thank you. Ben, do you want to lead the next question, or do you have any comments you want to share?
we have a question.
No, I think that covered. And oh, did you have a question, Gene?
We have a comment.
Yeah, we have a question. From time to time, we have a worker quit to go to another job or whatever, and pretty soon then we get papers from the unemployment office we got to file, and then pretty soon we got to have a court hearing and all this and that. This is extremely annoying for somebody that's out here working 70, 80 hours a week to produce a food product. What's behind this? What's going on?
Okay. Well, when it comes to the unemployment insurance, this is Dave. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I believe I understand the question is that if they quit, why do we even need to involve the employer at all? And the reason we invite the employer to participate in that first level adjudication, what we call a fact finding, is that we need to identify what the true reason was for separation. And we ask the employer to be online to keep everybody honest, if you will. If the employer is not online, it is true that the quit puts the burden of proof on the person who's filing the unemployment benefits. Why did you quit? If the employer is not online, there are a certain number of elements that can make you eligible for unemployment insurance even if you quit the job. One would be, I was having trouble getting paid. And if they tell us I was having trouble getting paid, so I quit, and you, the employer, is not online to defend yourself and say, oh, that's not true at all, we have no choice but to believe them and award the benefits, and that does leave you as a chargeable entity for any benefits paid. So the invitation to participate is, in essence, you're protecting your own financial liability in that particular claim.
That's good enough reason not to hire people, really. In other words, we're better off to do it ourselves rather than mess around. Another issue is we had a manager in one of our retail stores that was intimidating ladies, and we decided to fire him, and we had to pay him unemployment. You know, somebody that's harming our business like this, if we can't take control and fix it ourselves, it's a sad state of affairs.
Well, we would have had an interview to make a determination on whether or not benefits were allowed or denied, and I have to ask, in that particular situation, did you participate?
I lost both times.
Okay. Well, I would be happy to review that particular case and give you some one-on-one feedback concerning that particular issue, but of course that would have to be done separately and offline, but I would be happy to offer that service to you. You know, the main thing is that we want you to understand, if you lose, why you lost, so that it can be an educational opportunity that you can avoid in the future. You know, I would be happy to look into that particular case and give you some feedback, Jay, offline, of course.
Protect our business, and we're going to do what we need to do that.
I completely understand, sir.
Should we go on to the next question then? Or is there any more comments? Okay.
Well, sure. That I know that I'm not speaking with anybody from the IRS or anything, but it's my understanding that anyone earning, you know, either by getting the actual paycheck or CSA share, under $600 does not need to take any taxes out. Now is this accurate?
I think you're looking at, I think the $600 rule is for issuing a 1099. I'm not mistaken. But if they're your employee, there are requirements that you have to take out the required Social Security, old age survivor benefits, and withholding taxes if they've, you know, basically filled out the W-4 to have withholding taxes taken out. If the individual's making so little money, I mean, just a mere pittance, then they may be filing that they're exempt from state or federal withholding, but that does not negate their Social Security responsibilities.
Okay. Now, is there a way that I could pay kind of the contract farm workers by the piece instead of an hourly wage? That I've just found kind of, if I'm paying people by the quart of strawberry they pick, that they're a little more productive than if I'm paying them, you know, X number of dollars an hour. So is that okay, as long as it sounds like there isn't a minimum wage for agricultural workers, so I don't need to make sure that that they're making at least X number of dollars an hour, but is that okay to pay them by the piece?
Yes, this is Karen. Yes, you can pay the workers by the piece. But I want to backtrack a little bit because one of the questions that's down towards the bottom of the listing is what distinguishes contract labor from a hired hand? In the state of Iowa, at least, there is no such thing as contract labor. You're either an employee or you're an independent contractor. So an independent contractor is somebody who hangs their shingle out to the public and holds their services out to the public. So we definitely are looking at these contract laborers, from what I'm hearing described, are employees of whoever they're providing those services for. So you can definitely pay them by the piece.
Mm-hmm. And Mike here, the question is, just to make sure we're on the same wavelength, Ben, because of your number of employees you have, you're not subject to the minimum wage, but others, now Hanson's of course would be. They have way more than 5 full-time employees, or 5.5 full-time employees. So they would have to pay the minimum wage, which currently is $7.25. But regardless of whether you have to pay the minimum wage or not, no law, state or federal, mandates how the manner you pay people. You can pay them by the hour, you can pay them by the piece, you can pay them a salary, you can pay them whatever you want. But if you're subject to minimum wage, they have to average at least the minimum wage for the hours they work. So I mentioned to you how active our agency is down south, where there's a lot more hand-harvested labor or agriculture work. Everybody pays by the piece down there. If you go down there where they're picking onions or cabbages or cucumbers or whatever, it's all by the pound, by the piece. But we walk in there and we say, look, you got to make sure that your piece rate averages at least the minimum wage if you're subject. And under that migrant law, there's a promised wage. When these folks are recruited, they're told, well, you'll get $8 an hour, you'll get $9 an hour. It has to equal that wage. So you can certainly pay a piece rate, Ben. In your world, you don't really have to care too much about whether it equals minimum wage. But we usually tell people, you want to, again, keep a record that would enable you to determine how much they're making an hour. I mean, if they work for you for 6 hours that day and they pick, several hundred, pieces of whatever, you probably would behoove you to know, how effective they are. But from a legal standpoint, you wouldn't have to worry about it until you had to pay the minimum wage. Okay?
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Everybody seems to make more than minimum wage when they're even picking by the quart, that I pay $1.50 per quart. But I have had a few that may only get maybe 4 quarts in an hour or so. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so in your world, you wouldn't have to worry about it. If you grow and you start getting more employees, then you're going to have to track that to ensure that that piece rate is equal to at least the minimum wage. And you know what? This is going to sound harsh, but it's reality. If they're not making minimum wage, they need to go. I mean, right. Again, please understand, 31 years puts a little skin on a guy, and I've seen so many employers that hang on to people who aren't doing the work that they should be doing for them out of good nature. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. But then we walk in and say, well, this person's only been making $4 an hour for the last 2 years, and the employer says, well, I was just doing them a favor, that they weren't making me any money. Well, unfortunately, they're going to cost you even more money now because you're going to have to pay them the back pay to bring them up to minimum wage. So anyone on the call who's got more than 5.5 full-time employees and is paying piece rate, it is your responsibility to ensure they equal the minimum wage, and that's where the records come in. Okay.
I'm going to tie a little bit of this into the next question that says, does a farm need to pay unemployment benefits for seasonal workers? Okay. And what Mike was saying was that if the employee is not working out, sever your ties as quickly as possible, because in that situation you will have paid in less wages for this worker. So potentially they could draw less benefits for unemployment insurance purposes.
Good point.
Okay. Now, with my unemployment background, okay, I'm going to tell a little bit about what's required, okay, for workers, okay? So for an ag employer, you do not have to pay unemployment insurance if you're basically small in nature, okay? What we're looking at for an employer to make ag liability or to be established for unemployment insurance purposes is you've paid $20,000 or more in a given calendar quarter. That would make you a liable employer and subject to unemployment insurance, or you had 10 or more workers in any part of 20 calendar weeks during the year. That would make you a subject employer. Okay? And that's on the federal side as well. So that's for federal unemployment insurance and state. So, you know, your smaller operations are definitely going to fall below that. Your larger ag operations, especially if you're harvesting crops, and if it's a corporation and you're looking at paying wages to the corporate officers at the end of the year, you're definitely going to fall into the situation where you're going to have to pay unemployment insurance. So if you're hiring, you know, seasonal workers or summer workers or whatever type of worker you're hiring, you know, depending on your overall operation, you may not be subject, if you're small enough and stay below the 10 or more workers in 20 or more calendar weeks, or the 20,000 in a calendar quarter. Any questions on that part?
No, I think that's pretty clear. I wanted to kind of touch base again with the difference between contract labor and hired labor. Now, would the contract labor be that I know these refugees have also worked for a couple other farms, so I feel like that's kind of, you know, putting their advertisement out there that they're there to work. So would they still be contract labor as long as I'm not giving them actual directions of what to do and being there monitoring them? If I say, this is the task I would like completed, would you please complete that? Is that kind of the definition of contract labor?
This is Karen. No. It's really clear cut. They're an employee or they're an independent contractor. If they're an independent contractor, you have no direction and control, you cannot control the manner or means with which they perform their services. You basically can say, go pick the field, and here's the price I'll give you for the field, and when they're done, that's the price you've agreed to. That would basically, in a nutshell, make it an independent contractor, because you're not controlling the manner or means which they perform the job. But there really is no such thing as, we call it, contract labor.
Well, and this, Mike, because our federal rules dovetail perfectly with the states, and you know, we could get into this one for a long time too. But you know, does this person have a chance for profit and loss? And normally, an employee, you know, who's making by an hourly pay or even picking by the piece, you know, no, they're not going to lose money. They may not make a lot, but they're not going to lose. A contractor who botches a job, you know, and still has to finish it, you know, then they have a chance for loss. It's all this stuff. But what I would suggest is, when we're done, I'll give you my office number and you can call. But we can also go on our website, and we have a fact sheet called Employment Relationship. And that's really what Karen's talking about. Who's an employee and who's not? And it's actually a 7-point test that the Supreme Court actually laid out to determine who's a contractor and who's an employee. And you really need to look at that. And it's not simple because no one factor really controls. You got to look at all 7. But they're the things Karen mentioned, what I mentioned about profit and loss. Do they bring their own tools? That's a huge one. You know, we've all hired contractors to come and remodel our bathroom. You know, they show up in their pickup, they got all their tools. They're not borrowing my tools, you know. So that's a contractor. But if you're providing, you know, the whatever tools they may have to use, if there is any, you know, that's an argument against it. Also, to build on what Karen says, typically contractors have a skill. You know what I mean? They might be a carpenter, an electrician, or a you know, something. And I know that's not in your realm, but they might be somebody like that. Someone who's merely providing the labor, the sweat of their back, sweat off their back, you know, that type of thing. They're not bringing it to the job. So I'd have to agree, you know, with what she says. But if you jot one thing down, if this is something you're concerned about, I would say employment relationship, U.S. Department of Labor fact sheet, and I'll give you our phone number. We'll happily send it to you or direct you to it if you want to give us a call. Matter of fact, since I'm on that subject, I'll just give you our number right now. And we have offices all over the states of Iowa and Nebraska. My office covers both states. But our laws are identical. I see people on the call from all over the place, Michigan, Vermont. The laws are identical. But for our number, jot this down, and you can call us anytime. It's area code 515-284-4625. 284-4625, U.S. Department of Labor, wage and hour. And we'll happily send you, we'll walk you through it if you'd like, but we'll happily send you anything you need in that regard. But you do want to know, and let me just tell you this, who's an employee and who's a contractor is a point of emphasis for at least 3 agencies I'm aware of: U.S. Department of Labor, IRS, and the state of Iowa. My office works with some of Dave and Karen's counterparts in workforce development called the Iowa Misclassification Task Force. And they're literally out there looking for this stuff. And why? because they want to find out if the taxes are going in, unemployment, workers' comp, state, withholding, all that stuff. My agency, we're looking at it because we want to ensure that these people are getting minimum wage, if they're entitled to it, and overtime. And so it's a huge point of emphasis for a number of agencies. So it would behoove you to know, what those rules are. Okay, so be careful. The other thing I was going to ask you about, Ben, with those refugees, did they have a leader of some type, a person who helped get them work, or are they just kind of operating as a group? I'm just curious. You said they're from Burma,
no,
right?
That's where this one group was that I hired last year. That after talking with you guys now, I'm not sure if I'm going to use that again anymore. But no, they didn't have a leader or anything like that with them.
Well, did you know where they lived? Are they local folks for you?
Yeah, they live in Des Moines.
Okay, well then so when they're done with you, they went home to go to bed every night at their own house, right?
Right. Yep. Or most of the time they would work 3 or 4 hours in the day, and then they go to DMAC to take classes.
Well, from our perspective, now I'm not going to speak to workforce development or any of these others, but from the Department of Labor, you wouldn't have any problems because they're not migrants under our definition. Yeah, they came here from another country, but they live locally, so they're going home every night. So you don't have to worry about that Migrant and Worker Protection Act. And since you don't have to pay minimum wage or overtime, you really have nothing to worry about from the Federal Department of Labor. Now, from other agencies who might be saying maybe you should be withholding on them, that'd be a different story.
Right.
So,
sure.
And none of us work for those people, so you don't have to worry about it. Hey, listen, and I know Luke said this, but we're here to help you guys. If you think that any of us are sitting here taking notes, we're not. We don't care. Our role is really simple. We're here to give you the information you need, and it's just as simple as that. It's just as simple as that. And that's true. So don't be afraid to pose any question you may have.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I know you kind of went over it a little bit, but at least with my last question, well, actually, what would be the youngest age, again, that I could hire for a farm employee? Normally, I don't hire anyone under 16 because I just want them to have a driver's license, to be able to get out to the farm.
Sure.
But, like, for example, I'd like to hire high school kids there for summer break to come out and pick strawberries for me to make a little money to go somewhere or something like that.
Well,
so, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Ben. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, that was kind of my first question, and then also I'm curious about, do the age restrictions differ, if it's your own child working for you on the farm as opposed to hiring a neighbor kid?
Well, I'm pretty sure that in this arena, the state and federal laws are identical or very close. They're not always identical in the realm of child labor law, but typically speaking, 14 is the youngest you can hire on a farm. However, with parental consent, and I want to emphasize written parental consent, not verbal, written, farmers can hire kids as young as 12. Now, do you want to? I don't know. That's your call. But we see 12-year-olds out there detasseling corn and stuff. But if we go visit those type of folks, we want to know that the employer had a written consent from that child's parent to allow them to work there. Okay? But 14 is generally the youngest. Now, these rules apply regardless of your 500-man day, how many employees you have. If you're in agriculture selling food out in commerce, you're going to be subject to both the state and federal child labor laws. So don't mistake that if you don't have to pay minimum wage, you don't have to follow the child labor, because that's not true. But then you've got the rules are different for agriculture employers, for farmers. But the bottom line is there's dangerous equipment kids have to stay off of. There's no real limit to their hours or anything, but there's a list of dangerous things kids are not allowed to do. Okay? So basically you would have no problem without any consent hiring a 14-year-old on up, but you'd have to watch until they turn 16. Okay? Once they're 16, then there's no dangerous prohibitions against dangerous equipment for agriculture. And for the farmer's own children, there's a complete exemption from the child labor laws for the children of the farmer. Okay? And those of you, if you follow it, you're probably aware of the big brouhaha last year when my agency tried to put in place new child labor laws for agriculture, and they wound up withdrawing them because of all the backlash. And I'll just say this, it's a shame in a way, because the child labor in ag laws we have now were written in the 1940s, and agriculture's changed a lot. And it's a dangerous place for kids to be. We all know that. But it is what it is. So my take is if you hire minors under the age of 16, you probably want to call our office or get a hold of the state, Karen's office, and get a hold of the booklets that we have about child labor laws, because it would be very beneficial for you to at least have that available so you know. Don't let that kid jump on a tractor, at 13. Don't let them do some of the things that would be prohibited by federal law. Okay. Again, your own children, there are no restrictions. This is Karen. Regarding the state of Iowa law, 14 and 15-year-olds can do, the detasseling in the summer months, June, July, and August, and there really are no restrictions with regards to the kids doing the detasseling. But part of our law says part-time working agricultural, and this is not including any migratory labor, that there is an exemption or exception to child labor laws. But what we're looking at is part-time. What that means is under 20 hours. If the kids work more than 20 hours, child labor laws come into play. And that's when you're starting with all your restrictions as far as duties, hours, all those types of things. So if it's under 20 hours, then there are no restrictions. But if it's over 20, then the restrictions start coming into play. And let me point out another principle, kind of a basic legal principle. When you have two different laws that aren't identical, like the federal and the state, you must always abide by or follow the law that offers the most protection. In the area of labor law, and the most protection to the employee. So if the state said you could hire a 14-year-old for 20 hours a week to do all these various things, but the feds say you can hire a 14-year-old, but they can't do these various things, you have to follow the federal law. And if my agency shows up and you say, well, hey, I'm following state law, our comment's going to be, well, good for you, but, we still got an issue here with federal law. So do keep that in mind if you hire minors. So my coworker, this is Karen, my coworker that handles a lot of our child labor investigations, she does a lot of presentations, and she does present on the differences between state law and federal law, and she does go over the point where, take the part that's most restrictive or most protective of that child. So we try to let everyone know what the laws are on both sides and what the restrictions are, so that employers aren't complying with state law and then they're getting in trouble with federal law. So we want to make sure that everyone's aware of both. You had a question?
Yeah, this is Jordan Hansen. To be clear then, we have lots of grandkids that work on the farm here, feeding calves, doing minor stuff like that. So we could actually write them a paycheck. Sure.
Yeah. Sure. No prohibition against that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Part of the children working on the farm is, and this is for Iowa child labor, is that the children have to be working on the farm where the parents are, owners, operators of the farm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the parents should be present. Yes. Usually that doesn't mean in the back 40 either. Mm-hmm. Usually they should be somewhere around where they're within eyesight, usually we try to recommend, of the children. We don't have that rule at the federal level that the parent has to be present. So we just say they have to be old enough to be employed. And we have the same rule that if you're an owner/operator of a farm and in a family operation, there could be more than one set of parents who fall into that category, then those children can be working on that farm. But the parents have to be involved as owners or operators or both in some fashion. Okay, so I'm sure you guys would be fine with and that was, if you remember, that was the big brouhaha over the change in the federal child labor laws last year. They're going to change that and say you had to be the sole owner. And that's what really got people up in arms. And I totally understand that. I mean, I worked on my uncle's farm, but I wouldn't have fallen into that category, but we know that happens all over the place.
So with that paycheck for those kids that are, say, 10, 11 years old, are they subject to withholding?
They would probably fill out a W-4 showing they're exempt. Okay. Because they're not going to make enough money during the year that they're going to have to pay income tax on.
Okay. I had another question about, if we could go back to unemployment for a minute. What type of employee is eligible for unemployment? And by that I mean, do they have to have worked a certain number of hours a week for us, considered part-time or full-time?
Okay. This is Dave. I'll be happy to handle that. In order to be eligible for an unemployment claim or a payable unemployment claim, we basically look back 18 months from the point of filing, and they have to have historic wages in that time frame. They might have only worked for you for a couple weeks, and then they attempt to file. What really matters is over the course of the last year and a half, if they have covered wages showing on our database that would be usable to support an unemployment claim. So it could be any number of employers that could be added together to make them monetarily eligible for the claim. Now, when it comes to whether or not the benefits will be paid, a lot of the weight does fall on the most recent employer and the reason they are separated from that employer. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, so basically anybody that's worked for us at all, doesn't matter how much they work, they can legitimately file for unemployment.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Anybody who wishes to file an unemployment claim, we have to allow them to. Even if they come in and say, I haven't worked in 10 years, but I want to file an unemployment claim, we have to allow them to do so. Okay. And then, you know, the wages that are on the database really make the difference on whether or not they're monetarily eligible, and then we go forward from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Part of what Dave brought up earlier, this is Karen, was that you know, the employers need to participate in their fact-finding and their unemployment insurance hearings so that they can protect their unemployment insurance account. Because if a claim is charged to an employer, it'll affect potentially their unemployment rate for 5 years. So if you have a low rate in Iowa, some of the rates can go as low as 0. But you know, when the economy was bad a couple years ago, the high rates were up like 9.5%. And so, and you know, depending on the taxable wage base for the state, you know, on and on, it can be quite expensive for an employer to have employees. So it's in the employer's best interest to protect their unemployment account at all costs. So that means, you know, if you have a worker and you're releasing them for cause, document why you're releasing them for cause. You know, you may be dismissing them, but that's something you could potentially bring up in a hearing, that, you know, you've dismissed them for cause, and what is your proof that you have? You've counseled them, you've coached them, or they've violated company policies. You have to show what your cause is. Any other questions?
I see we have that last one about what are good documents for a farmer to have. So I think we mentioned a bunch, but we could rehash them. You know, you need to have your I-9s in place for your folks. I'm trying to think of what other documents. Again, if you hire migrants, you want to see that farm labor contractor. I don't know. Your records, you know, of how much you paid them and how many hours they worked. Those are important records to have. And I would strongly suggest, even if you're a situation where you're not subject to the minimum wage and overtime, those records are helpful. Because you know why? The employees who file complaints with us, they don't know that their employer didn't have to follow these rules. And you may have to defend yourself sometimes. So if you have records, it really, truly helps. But yeah, definitely the I-9 and the W-4. You know, there's no reason not to have everybody fill out a W-4. Wouldn't you agree, Karen?
Right.
Really? Again, you're protecting yourself. You really are. And I know documentation is a burden, but and it is. I mean, I know. My wife had a business. I know. But if you realize, if you had lived my life for a while and you realize how important documentation is and how it can get people off the hook, get employers off the hook if they can just prove, look, I never had 6 full-time employees. Look, here's all the records of the people I've had working for me in the last 2 years. And look, count them up. You know, I never had 6 full-time workers. You don't have to try to convince the investigator that you're telling the truth. You can prove it. So, you know, documentation is key in this arena. It really is.
One of the items you'll want to definitely make sure you keep track of, and, you know, track them by employee, is their time cards, their records of times they worked. You know, and especially for minors that are working, you need to clock in and clock out times, because I know for 14 and 15-year-olds, if anyone's in an enterprise that's using a 14 or 15, there are restrictions regarding their stopping and ending times, and we do look at those for potential civil penalties if the children are clocking out under 15 minutes late, over 15 minutes late, or, you know, it's significantly early in the morning. So we do look at the times in and out. If it's a handwritten record, if it's a punch in and out, you definitely want to keep those records.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Ben or Jane, any other questions from you guys before the end of the night? Well,
I just had one more quick question involving kind of with child labor. I I encourage my CSA members to come out and volunteer, and they like to come out and volunteer, and they want to bring their kids out with them. Are there any restrictions as far as an age of, like, can I have a 10-year-old come out there and help me hand dig garlic? That we aren't using any mechanized equipment or anything. We're just using a spading fork and digging garlic up, and they're helping me clean it and then tie it up to hang. I'm getting on the ladder and everything. Are there restrictions as far as volunteering and having the kids come out?
Well, what we're looking at is that the child is with their parent, but you don't get the parental exemption just because the parent's along, okay? What we're looking at is that your business is small enough that it falls below the requirements to comply with child labor laws. So if you do, become of a size and the child even does volunteer, what we're looking at is a volunteer would be for a nonprofit organization. You're, in essence, a business, a for-profit, or you're treating it like a business enterprise, then the child would have to be compensated.
Well, let Mike here too. The thing about volunteers is, and I was hoping we get through this without having to talk about that. And I'm kidding when I say that, but this has been a really political hot potato issue at the state and federal level. Again, since I started with the Department of Labor in '82. And the reason is the government doesn't want to discourage volunteerism, but they don't want volunteerism to take over and replace people who should be paid. So, I see it all the time. Come out and stomp the grapes at the winery. Volunteer, and then we'll give you a bottle of wine at the end of the day. But, I mean, if they're replacing people that you would have paid to do that work, that's the first indication you got some issues. Now, is the Department of Labor going to come crack down because you have volunteers? No. I mean, they're really not. But it's just a very gray area of the law, and I can't sit here, and I'm sure Karen says the same thing. We can't give you a black and white scenario when volunteers are quote-unquote okay and when they're not. I see volunteers every day that I know if it went to court, there'd be some question. When I walk in the hospital and I see the help desk, the info desk or the gift shop with these retired folks, the hospital would pay somebody to work that gift shop if they didn't have anybody to do it. They'd pay somebody to work in the information desk. My guess is if somebody wanted to file suit, if some employee wanted to go to court, some volunteer, they might win. So I'm just saying, a volunteer that comes in once a while, I mean, your share people, they're getting something back from you. They're partners in a sense. And we're kind of taking a hands-off. I'm speaking for the feds now. We're taking a hands-off approach to that just because it's just politically dynamite. But just be careful. You have somebody who volunteers week after week after week after week, and they're not part of your buy-in folks who get their weekly shares. I'd be very careful of that. Somebody who shows up to volunteer, 2 times a summer, 3 times a summer, don't worry about it. But if they start coming all the time, you better be careful. And I have to say what Karen says too. This is an area we can't give you a black and white answer. But I would be very careful with those 10-year-olds. I really would. And under federal law, they got to be 12 anyway, even with parental consent. So I'd be very careful. If I were you, Ben, honestly, my take would probably be if they're under 12 and I don't have the parental experience, I'd probably say thanks, but come back in 2 years. Seriously. I think you're going to save yourself potential for a whole lot of headaches. A whole lot. And the other thing, because I've seen a couple of the comments, and then I'll be quiet, but we've had 5 deaths in Iowa, Nebraska in the last 2 years of minors. And you do not want to be in that situation. And these were all employees. The fine is $100,000. And you're not going to win it. You're not going to win it. And if you think the fine's bad, wait till you see the civil suit that follows. And so you may do a lot of things with your kids, like putting them on the tractor when they're 10 or the skid loader or whatever, but my goodness, do not do that with a neighbor kid or another kid. Because that kid gets hurt, we literally scan the media for those articles. And I get calls from Washington, D.C., personally to Mike Staebell's office. Hey, Mike, we read the Des Moines Register and saw a kid died out by Newton on the farm. Send somebody out and check it out. And we have to. We have to. Now, on that one, last summer, he was employed by his father. And it was a horrible thing, but we had to go check it out. Now, if that had been a neighbor kid, $100,000. Boom. So please, 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 don't treat the neighbor kids like your own kids when they're coming to work for you. Okay? Just Mike's little note. Anyway, I'm sorry. It looked like there's one more question about what? Other person's animals.
We're reading a question in the chat
Yeah,
box.
yeah. And Paul Ewing says, does this cause my worker who may help with these animals? Okay. So the question that Paul put forward is he may have other folks' animals on his property, and then his workers are dealing with those other animals as well as his own. Well, what happens in that scenario is that worker then is no longer employed by a farmer. Well, they're employed by a farmer, but there's multiple animals on that farm that are owned by other farmers. So in that situation, that employee loses the exemption from overtime, and they'd be entitled to overtime in any week that they handle or work with those animals that aren't owned by that farmer. That's the problem, and we run into it all the time. We really do. So you really have to be careful if you're having other farmers' produce or animals or whatever on your farm now, because the whole idea behind the agriculture exemption from overtime was that they're working for a single farmer and on that farmer's produce or livestock. So once you expand out to other people's, then you're going to have the possibility of paying overtime. So that's the dilemma there. Okay, what's our cutoff time, Luke? What, Luke?
4 minutes ago.
Yeah, it was.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, we're going a little bit over too, so I want to give Jean one more chance to say something if she had something.
I have nothing to add except thank you for joining us. And well, if you have any questions on our part, be sure to give us a call. Thanks to everyone that joined us this evening.
This is Karen with Iowa Workforce. We'll provide the practical farmers with our web address, for child labor as well as wage in the state of Iowa, so that if anyone wants to make contact, they can, secure the information from the practical farmers.
And thank you, Luke. This is Mike for putting our website info on there too, and you got our phone number. So I really want to encourage you. Don't be afraid to contact us or call us. We'll give you every kind of assistance you need and want, every bit of it.
I think we'll be doing more Farminars on labor regulations, that's for sure. So thank you all for joining us. This concludes our Farminar series for the spring and for the whole off-season. Have a great summer of growing and marketing crops, and I hope to see you all again next off-season starting in November for a whole new fall Farminar series 2013. Thanks, Ben, and thanks for our funders, and thank you, experts, for being on tonight. See you all soon.